Hello, everyone. As Holly mentioned, my name is Watchen Nyanue, and I am so excited to be talking to you today about what to do when your employee asks for a raise. Um, as she mentioned, I know it can be very awkward. It can be awkward if you're prepared. It can be awkward if you feel unprepared. It can be awkward if it's high performing talent. It can be awkward if it's someone who is low performing talent. Like there is no situation for most of us in which talking about money is not awkward. This topic is near and dear to my heart because I love negotiating, which I know is not the norm for most people. But like I get a little secret thrill when I like sit across from someone and have to talk about navigating maybe a tough money situation and getting to a result that hopefully is a win-win for everyone. A little bit about me. So I am a talent management specialist. Prior to starting I Choose the Ladder, which is a career development agency based in Chicago that works primarily with Fortune 100 companies to do employee development and retention work. And we focus primarily on the development and retention of Black female talent. But because the organizations that we work with are so large, we end up working with pretty much everyone. And if this is of any comfort to you, everyone, regardless of how long they've been working, how long they've been in management, have issues and challenges with this specific topic. So don't feel like you're alone. Don't feel like, why don't I know this yet if I've been working for a while? Like it is something that is uncomfortable for everyone. And I know we do land acknowledgements here, and Holly helps me with mine because in the States, like we don't ever acknowledge because we don't do a lot of things in the States. But long before European settlers came to the Chicago region, it was home to the Bijawi, the Ottawa, the Potawatomi, the Miami, and then other Native American tribes here in the United States, but specifically in Chicago, which is where I am from. As the slide shows, like I've worked for quite a few large organizations prior to starting my current company. And the reason that I started really was because there is a need. There are things that unfortunately, some of our counterparts know a lot sooner than we do in the professional space. And so I looked at this as an opportunity to close some of the soft skill gaps that we have as we try to navigate working for larger corporations. As Holly mentioned, please feel free to share any questions that you have in the chat, but we want to start with a specific one. So how do you feel about negotiating with your staff? The first word that comes to mind. When I say, hey, you're going to negotiate with your staff tomorrow, what is the first word that comes to mind? Stressed out, cornered, ugh, discomfort, uneasy. So what I'm getting from this is that y'all are loving it. Like when I say, let's do this tomorrow, you're like, yes, let's go. I am ready. But that's not what I'm seeing in the chat, right? And so hopefully one of the outcomes that we will have from this conversation is that it's not as uncomfortable because you will feel prepared and you would have been thinking about this maybe from a different perspective than where you currently sit. Because what we will share today is pretty tangible. Like I'm someone who likes to be like in the tactical space. And so we'll make sure that at least you can move from discomfort to slightly more comfortable by the time we're done with this conversation. Okay, so I want to start first by telling you guys a story. As I mentioned, prior to starting my company, I was a senior executive at the WNBA team here in Chicago. If you don't know much about the WNBA, they don't make a lot of money, right? Like most teams are in the red. They're not profitable. Even the ones that are owned by their NBA counterparts, they just don't make a lot of money, right? And they also have really small staff. And the way that the staff typically starts is you start as an intern because sports is a relationship-based business, and you work your way up through the organization. And so when I joined the organization 5 years ago, there was this kid who was a rock star, right? So I was more senior in terms of my experience in the work world, but Alex was definitely more experienced in knowing the organization that we worked for because he had been there since he was an intern. By the time I got there, I think he'd been working in the department for four-ish years and had kind of been the backbone of the department. If you needed anything done, Alex get it. He had the relationships, he had the drive. He pretty much was like the perfect employee, if there is such a thing. And I remember the day that Alex came to me and asked me for a raise. And I remember in that moment being like, wait, what? Where is this coming from? Like, I thought you were happy. You're getting paid more than everybody. Like, I didn't say these things out loud, but in my mind, I'm like, you get paid more than anybody else on the team. You see the numbers, so you know we're not making a bunch of money. Like, why would you think that now would be the right time to ask me for a raise? But I couldn't say those things out loud because Alex was my like star student. I had just started and I couldn't like afford to have him to leave the organization because I honestly did not have the skill set at the time to be able to recover quickly and do what I needed to do if Alex had left. I was also like kind of mad, like you've only been working for 3 years and you feel like you deserve to make how much, right? But again, I didn't say this out loud, but this was stuff that was running through my head. Like when I was your age, I was making 50,000 less than you're currently making, right? Like, so what gives you the audacity to feel like you need more? Plus you still live with your mama, you're not paying rent, right? But you can't say those things to your staff. But I knew his business and I'm like, boy, you do not pay rent. You barely pay for your own gas. Like, I feel like what you get paid is fine, right? But again, he in that situation was the person who had kind of the experience and the knowledge that I needed in order for me to be successful. And so my emotional response plus the desire to retain talent, right, were really at conflict at that time. And so I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the tactics that I use to not only retain Alex, but to also try to start to develop him into a leader. And when we get to the end of the talk, I will actually let you guys know what happened with Alex. But right now we're going to talk about the tactics because there are different phases to a negotiation. And I feel like the reason that negotiations are so stressful for managers and people leaders is because we skip the first two phases and we go straight to the conversation, and we have not done any of the prep work that would have given you the tools and the ability to actually have negotiation conversations that are productive for both you and for your employees. So before someone asks you for a raise or comes with a negotiation thing, right, you should be setting yourself up for success. And there are very specific things that you should be doing and thinking about. I think Dana mentioned like, well, every day somebody's asking for a raise, which means you are always in one of these phases. And so the more well-versed you get with them, that you can identify like, oh, I'm in phase 1 with this person, or I'm in phase 3, it helps make the conversations a lot better and a lot easier. So for the promotions and raises, the first question to ask is, does your company have a process, right? Do you have an established process for how people get raises, when people get raises, right? And for a lot of us, it's in our employee handbook. We kind of know it, kind of don't. And as a leader, you may know it, but the second thing is, does your employee know what that process is? Right? Has it been clearly communicated to them so that, let's say they're asking you every day, do they know that they're asking you outside of a raise cycle? Do they know that there is a raise cycle? Right? And do you have the relationship that you will need like in the process to create a yes? Like where are your relationships as it pertains to the larger organization around what you can and can't do? So when we first started, Dana said like, I can't say, like, there's no way that I can say yes anyway because of all the strictness and all of this stuff. But I'm sure within an organization, right, there have been times where exceptions have been made, right? It might be really hard, but there are people who have the ability to do spot bonuses and other things. And so being really honest with yourself of like, what's the process? Do I know it? Have I communicated this process to the members of my team? Do they understand it and know like what can be done and what cannot be done? And then being really honest with yourself around what relationships you have in being able to move the needle in whatever capacity, right? And so there are companies, especially the larger the companies are, that are very traditional in that, you know, our process is you work X amount of years before you get promoted. I don't care how great you are. You work 3 years before you go to the next level. You work 5 years, you work 7 years. I have a client of mine that we work with, and you could be at the same title for 10 years and make more money. Well, that's not communicated to employees in their onboarding process. And so a person who comes from a company where you're getting promoted every 2 years and getting more money every 2 years, it's going to be a culture shock to them, right? To be at the same director level for 10 years, it's like, what am I doing wrong? Why is this not something that is like that? Why am I not being rewarded in the way that I'm accustomed to? And so you being very well versed in your promotion and raise process, and then also making sure that you have clearly and consistently communicated what that process is to your staff and to your team, makes it a lot easier when you get to the place where you are talking about money to them, because they'll know if you're doing it because you actually can't, and it doesn't create this narrative that you're picking favorites and all these things, is everybody's on the same page about the process. Okay. what if there is no process? So no process is kind of sort of a process, right? But what that does for your organization is that it allows your employees to create their own narratives, which is absolutely detrimental to your culture, right? Because then at the point where you say no to someone and then you say yes to someone else, they are then left to interpret why that person got a no and why this person got a yes. And because of confidentiality things with employment, you can't really tell them, right? Like specifically, Holly got promoted or got more money because of X, Y, and Z, and you're not doing this, right? And so it allows them to create in their own minds what it is, like why you made the decision that you did if there is no process. It also allows for you it allows for there to be a little bit of bias in the decision-making process. So there's an article that Harvard Business School has, and it's called Setting Up to Fail. And one of the things that they talk about is the ways in which managers unconsciously set their employees up to fail. And the way that happens is, let's say in the beginning of having an employee, you decide like this person is a rock star. So most of what you see because of confirmation bias is going to be the good things that confirm that this person is a rock star. And if in the beginning you say this person is not a great employee, they're not up to standard, whatever the case may be, what your mind is trained to look for, again, is things that confirm that that person is not a great employee. And so when those two individuals come and ask you for money or for a raise, that bias can kick in if there is not a process that then kind of clouds your decision making on who actually deserves what. And so if you don't have a process in your company, if there's not an official process, how can you create a process within your department that then allows you to be objective in how you decide, if you have the ability to, who is allowed to get more money or what warrants someone getting more money versus what doesn't? Because then you have a framework that you're using to then justify your decisions, and it's fair across the board. So when we're talking about metrics and competencies, right, this is still in phase one. You are not having the conversation yet. What criteria do you have that then signals to someone, or that you can communicate to someone that they are ready for the next thing, right? So when you're negotiating, you could be negotiating a bunch of things. You could be negotiating, more vacation, a higher title, more money. But like, what are the behaviors that you expect to see out of your employees in order to say, yes, this person is ready for the next level? What are some hard metrics that you have? And I know for folks who manage teams who are maybe not numbers driven, right? So you're not managing a sales team, maybe you're managing an operations team, right? Are there metrics that you can use to help you decide when someone is actually ready or when somebody deserves what it is that they're asking for? Are there projects, right, that carry more weight than others that you need to let your teams know that you are then using to measure if they're ready for the next level? And then the last thing is, are there competencies that you need to see displayed in order to say, yes, I can pay this person 10,000 more, because if that raise or if that additional salary gets questioned by my boss or my boss's boss, I have this list of things that I've used, right, to determine why I said yes to this person, why I said no to this person. If you don't know what these things are as a manager, it's your job to check in with your managers and maybe HR to see what is actually established, if there are actually frameworks that are in place. And you need to have these conversations both internally to get the information first, but also with your employees. Like, this should be an ongoing conversation, not just when you're doing performance reviews, but if somebody, people need to be clear on what the difference between a manager and a director is. What actually makes somebody ready for those roles, and like the responsibilities of those roles, so that they can hopefully be self-aware enough to know if they have hit those marks for you or for themselves, or if they have not, so that when they come to have the conversation, it's not an opinion-based thing. It's here's what we use to measure. Everybody has known that this is what we're using to measure, and here's how you stack up based on expectations around these measures. The other thing to think about in phase one, as you think about the culture that you work in, is your culture around feedback. So when we talk to employees, and a lot of the times employees of color, the number one complaint that we get about their managers is that they don't give them feedback that they can actually use, right? And they only get feedback when we're in performance review situation where you're saying no to me when I ask for money. Now, all of a sudden, I hear that you don't think that my competencies are up to snuff, right? And now it's like, oh, you're just saying that because you don't want to give me more money. But if you train yourself as a people manager to give feedback early and often, and give feedback that is specific, right? Balanced, constructive feedback with positive feedback, but not in the sense of like the feedback sandwich where they're like, say something nice, and then, you know, you say the thing that's the criticism and you then say something nice. What we found is that your employees find that disingenuous. They feel like you're just saying the nice things to soften the blow. And especially if the nice things that you're saying aren't in real time, they aren't really nice things. It's like, I have to say something nice about this person, so I'm going to say something. It's like they want, if there are opportunities for them to improve, they expect you to tell them that in real time and not wait until months later. And then they feel blindsided when it's like they thought that for 6 months they've been doing all the right things. They come to you and ask you for this in a negotiation, they ask you for this thing. And now all of a sudden there's like a dumping of, well, you haven't done this, and you haven't done this, and you haven't done that. And the feedback for us typically is like, well, where was this 6 months ago? If you didn't think I did great on this project that we did in January, why am I just finding out about it in March, right? Or in October when we're doing performance reviews? And I think you need to connect your feedback with the criteria for their next promotion or raise, so that the feedback is not seen as something that's personal or a personal critique to them. They see it as something that's actually being given to them to help them accomplish the thing that they've said that they wanted to accomplish when they, you know, when they first talk to you about, you know, whatever it is that they would try to do this year. You can talk about what they're doing well, right? So not like fake praise, but if there are things that your employees are actually doing well that you want to see more of, you can say, like, I think that you have managed the budget well. I think you've done a great job leveraging relations with our clients and our customers to help grow the business. I think that you've put processes in place, you know, that have helped make us more efficient, those types of things. But in order for me to be able to say yes to this next thing, here are the areas in which I still think you need development, right? That we can then use to help move you to the next level. So when you say no to something or not right now, make sure that you are connecting the dots between the feedback that you've given over the course of time and what they actually need to display, again, based on the metrics that we talked about that then help them move to the next level. So if I asked your employees right now what you would say to them or about them in a review, would they be right? In the chat. If I went to, like, I found one of your employees right now was like, you know, what do you think Lisa's going to say about you in your performance review this year? And they told me, how right would they be? Half would be right, half probably wouldn't. 80%, monthly feedback sessions, everybody would know. Okay, that is fantastic, which means that the hardest part of this, a lot of you are already getting right? And that is the feedback. Feedback is probably the most important component on how people respond when you tell them no, right? That's going to, the feedback or the level of intentionality with the feedback is probably one of the largest indicators on if you will be able to still get the same level of productivity and maintain the relationship with your employee if what you say to them is not their desired outcome. So kudos to y'all for being at 50% and above. The goal is to get to 100%, right? Because then if I'm an employee who's in the bottom 50% or in the 20%, it's like, well, why do they know and I don't? Are you not as invested in me? Are you not as invested in my career? Like, why are you telling some people certain things, right? And those are the types of things that give cultures, like, are thorns in cultures, because your employees talk, right? So after a review, I can come and say, oh, this is what Holly said in my review, and like give a detailed thing. And if my other colleague didn't get the same kind of feedback, now they're having some insecurities around, like, well, why? Like, why did you get all that? And I got like, oh, you're doing a good job, keep it up, but I can't give you any more money, right? So you have to be consistent in how you treat all of your employees so that your negotiations are received in the same way by everyone. Okay, so phase 2, you are preparing for the ask. Right? So you've done all this work, your communication is on point, you're giving the feedback that needs to be given, you are, you know, talking to people on a regular basis, you are not canceling your one-on-one meetings, right? Because I think that's one of the first things to go. People are like, I'm so busy, we can meet next week. And before you look, it's like a month that you have not had a one-on-one. So you're not doing it. I know nobody here would do that, obviously, but you're not canceling your one-on-ones. You are giving feedback as is needed. You are also giving affirmations and praise as is warranted. And now, you know, like, we're getting to the time of the year where people are going to start asking. So what does an actual, like, a win look like? So usually when employees think about negotiations, they only think about what a win looks like for them. And when people managers think about a negotiation, a win is what looks like a win for them, right? But in actuality, for the company and your department, the intersection of where your win is and where their win is actually what the win for the company is. And it increases your likelihood to be able to retain the talent that you want to retain. And in some cases, get rid of the talent that you do not want to retain, right? And so this is the zone of possible agreement. So before the ask, you should be clear on what a win looks like for you, but also what a win looks like for the people on your team who are trying to get a win, right? They're coming to work because they're trying to get a paycheck. They're trying to get some kind of career progression, and they feel like, at least for this moment or in this moment in time, that your company, your department is where that can happen. So spend some time before you get into the conversation to think about, well, here's what a win's going to look like for me. And, if you're a people manager, it could be to retain this talent without giving them any additional money. And for your employee, it may be to stay with this company, but get more perks, right? So if money is not an option, are there other perks that intersect that your employee thinks is a win and that you also think is a win, right? So you have to think about your negotiations. A successful negotiation is where everybody leaves feeling like they won, not where everybody leaves feeling like they compromised. And a successful negotiation in any case, not just with your employees, is where both parties leave the table feeling like they won. That is the objective. And I know it's not always possible, but that's what you should strive for in these conversations, where I feel like I won, my employee also feels like they won. Okay, so what does a win for an employee looks like, right? So what do you expect them to ask for? Going into performance reviews in these conversations, what do you expect them to ask for? Do you even know what they're going to ask for, right? And then the second part of that is like, what is the ask under the ask? So sometimes people may ask for a higher title, right? But what they really want is more visibility. And they think that being at a director level is what's going to give them the visibility. Well, are there other ways that you can give them visibility without giving them the title if that's not within your power to do, right? So as you think about what people are asking for, know your employees well enough to know what the ask under the ask is. And if there are creative ways that you can address that need, right, that gets you squarely in the center of the mutual win where everybody's going to feel like they won, right? What alternatives do you have that could satisfy the underlying need? So for Alex, right, what Alex cared about, yeah, the money would have been great, but Alex wanted validation. He wanted the company to know that he was the rock star that was keeping our department together, which was true and accurate, right? And so figuring out like, well, how can I do that if giving him more money? Because at the time we didn't have the budget. I had no money to give to anyone. I could barely afford to pay them what we were paying them just because of how the numbers played out. And so like, what are some other ways that I had to get creative to think about, like, how can I still satisfy this? But it's also because, one, I had taken the time to get to know Alex as a person, right? One of the reasons that negotiations don't necessarily go as well is because people feel like they're just a number that you're checking off on an employee spreadsheet. Most people don't really know the people that they work with for real. And this is not like, let's be in each other's business and let's talk about all the wild and crazy things that we did over the weekend. That's not what I mean. But I mean knowing like what motivates your employees, what demotivates them, how do they want to be rewarded, right? What ways do they show up? Like, how do they show up when they're doing their best work? If you can't answer those things, negotiations are going to be really hard for you. And I know for folks in the room who maybe manage large teams is a little bit harder. But I'm telling you, getting to know the people who work for you and with you as people first make everything else in your work life a lot easier, because people give you more grace. They give you the benefit of the doubt more often. They assume positive intent because they know the type of person that you are. And so even when you say no, it's not personal for them because they know that like, if you could do it, you would do it, right? And so what you need to think about with the win for employee, what do you expect them to ask for? What is the ask under the ask? And what alternatives do you have that could satisfy that underlying need? So another thing, and I know that, we are in, I don't remember who said this in the beginning, but like there was a time where because of the labor market, we had to give employees a lot of the things that, that they asked for because we didn't want them to leave. What's happening now with a looming recession, folks are like, well, we can do what we want to, right? The pendulum has swung in the other direction. And I am here to caution everyone against that, right? Because the employee workforce is still feeling like they deserve to be compensated and all these other things. And even with the recession looming, especially the younger generation, they do not care. They believe. And they'll figure it out. They'll become an influencer. They'll do all the other things that people are doing, that people are doing right now to make a living. But so you want to think about the micro factors that influence business decisions and employee decisions, right? So like, if there are downturns currently, the layoff, the recessions that are coming, and employees are reevaluating, and I think this is largely in part due to COVID, they are reevaluating their priorities and their loyalties, right? If they feel like you don't respect or appreciate their talents, they are completely fine going somewhere else. If they feel like there's a moving target for their success, they are completely fine with going somewhere else. Some of them are even fine with being unemployed. Like they are more than happy to be like, listen, this place is bad for my mental health. They don't see me, they don't appreciate me, they don't whatever, and I will walk out. And this isn't even for people who are underpaid. This is everyone, right? There are people who are walking away from high paying jobs right now because of the different factors that they are considering when they think about who they are as a person and where they want to lend their talents. And this is specifically true, and especially true for people who are in high demand. So high skilled workers, people who have the experience and the knowledge and specialized skill sets. This is also particularly true for them, but we're seeing this with most employees, in that they want to be in a place where people are considering them and their needs. And when we think about inflation, right, like if you go anywhere on social media, people are talking about how expensive things are. And so if you don't have a backup plan, if there is no money, right, that combats or helps them solve or maybe think through more creatively, right, what they're getting paid now can sustain their lives, right, or provide them with a level of stability, you are more likely to lose talent in the current environment. So just think about like what's going on in the world right now as you step into these negotiation conversations, and be very intentional with the words that you use. I know during COVID, when there were layoffs, there was the temptation for a lot of people managers to make their employees feel like they should be grateful that they still have a job because so many people lost their jobs. But the flip side of that, when you're looking at it from an employee perspective, they're like, yeah, I know all those people lost their jobs. I've been doing the jobs of 3 people and not being compensated for it, right? And so you want to make sure that you're not stepping into landmines that then make these conversations more contentious than they need to be, and that you are being really, really aware of the real life things that people are dealing with. And I know for managers, this is hard because you're dealing with those things in your personal life too. You're like, listen, I would like to get paid more money. Like I would like all of these things, but you have to be very, very intentional with the language that you use when you are going to go into these conversations. On the flip side, you think about your employees. For you too, as a people manager, like what does a win for you look like? And like with me, I write these things down. So we have a negotiation prep sheet that I use, right? So I try to think from my perspective and write it all out. And then I think from the employee's perspective and write it all out. And I actually try to find the zone of possible agreement before I go into the negotiation. And if we don't end up having to go there and use that, that's fine. But I'm always prepared, and I'm always like, okay, here's the best case scenario, and let's figure out a way how we can get there. And I do that prep work before I talk to the person. So first thing is, what do you really want? Do you really want this talent to stay, or do you not care? Right? And not that you don't care about the person, but it's like they're not a high contributor. Maybe they're a disruptive to the team. Maybe they're not moving in the same way that you need to at the speed that the division needs to, as it pertains to like innovation in the work. And so maybe you don't want to retain them. So maybe a win for you might be that employee resigning, right? We have to be very clear on what that looks like. How much are they worth to retain? So if you work in HR or as a people manager and you manage a P&L, you know that recruiting new talent is really expensive. By the time you do the interviewing and the recruiters and the getting them up to speed and the training, it can be really expensive. But for some talent, it's worth it, right? So for this specific person who's asking for this specific thing, like how much are they worth retaining? Is it an extra $5,000 going to make them, happy? And because, that's going to cost $25,000 to get somebody to step into their shoes, plus 3 to 4 months to get them up to speed. Are they worth it? And is it worth fighting for to get them what it is that they're asking for? And then the last thing is like, what can you actually provide? There are some places where your hands are really tied. And there's, structures that have been in place and systems that have been in place for a while, and there's literally nothing that you can do. But again, in phase one, that should have been communicated to your employees, but being very clear and honest, like, what can I actually provide? I know they want this, but here are the 12 things that I can provide. And one thing on the list might be what they're asking for, but then you might have other ideas that you can also bring to the table to help make the negotiation more of a conversation than like a dictatorship around like, this is what we're going to do. Okay. What we want in this phase is for you to be like a thought partner to your person, right? To your employee. And you want the feeling to be that like we are on the same team, because you are. Retaining this talent helps you do the work that you need to do, which then allows you to go and ask for the things that you need to ask for in your negotiation. I'm going to assume that the person who we're negotiating with is somebody that you actually want to retain, right? You also want to make sure that you aren't seen as the enemy in this, like the person who is always standing in the way of me and what I want, right? Every time I come and talk to you is always a no, but you don't help me think through how I can get to a yes. You want to be seen as a thought partner, even if the answer for right now is no or not right now, right? And it's going to depend on how you approach the conversation. You also want to be clear on like what the path forward looks like. And you do that together, right? They want this specific thing. You can't say yes right now, but here's a path forward that we could eventually get to a yes. Dana said earlier that they're never going to get the raise that they're asking for. That could be problematic for a lot of talent, to be like, for the rest of the time that you're working here, this is never going to happen. And, you know, as the manager, you're kind of in like an interesting position, because it's like, if you tell them the truth, they may leave, but if you don't tell them the truth, that could cause more damage. And so you have to think through, like, if this thing that they're asking for is never going to happen, what are the other options that we have, so that they know like, hey, this is off the table forever, but here are some other things, and would these things be equally as beneficial, valuable to you as you think through this work? And then you want to also help them align their development needs with the needs of the company, right? So one of the things that you'll hear people say, which is not 100% factual, is that you want to be in a sales role in an organization, because if you're somebody who generates revenue, they're not going to fire you. Not true, but it's true more often than, like, let's say if you're in PR or marketing, right? In a line of business that spends money. So all the things that they want to do, how can you strategically help them figure out, how can I align my own objectives with the company objectives, so that they're seeing the bigger picture and not feeling like they're just a person who checks the box and nobody actually cares about them. But if they can understand the why, and that you're putting them in this role and like how you see them as part of the bigger picture, it helps make the conversations a lot more, not fun, because negotiations are not fun necessarily for everybody, but it makes the conversations a lot more productive. One of the things that I want you to do before you get into this conversation is I want you to check your own beliefs on, you know, negotiations in general. If you are someone who struggles with negotiations and you are, you know, you feel when you have to negotiate for yourself, it's something that's anxiety producing, you want to make sure that you're not projecting that onto somebody else, right? And in terms of the generations, there are currently 5 generations in the workplace. So for the people who are the most senior, their experience coming through corporate is probably a lot different than the Gen Z folks who are like, I need to be CEO in the next 36 months or I'm out, right? Like, it's a very different mindset. And so as you think through, just because something happened when you were coming through the ranks does not mean that that's how it needs to happen now. And so you need to check yourself in terms of like, what do you believe because of your own corporate experience, and how much of that are you projecting onto your team, right? So like for me, with Alex, I was like, when I was your age, and it's like, but you're not Alex, right? And Alex is a completely different person, having a completely different corporate experience. And so don't project your own stuff, right, onto that person. The second thing that we also have to acknowledge is like, gender differences, right? There are certain genders, men, who are more comfortable negotiating than women are, right? Because of how we've been socialized and all those things. You need to keep that in mind, especially the power dynamics. If you are a male boss negotiating with a female team member or person who identifies as female, the power dynamics there are really, really strange. And so you have to make sure that you are not abusing that, or unconsciously or consciously using that as a way to get that person to not ask for what they want. And in the same way with women, understanding that power dynamics and how we've been socialized to think about asking for what we've earned and what we deserve, you have to practice, right, before you go to sit across from somebody, so that our socialization does not allow us to accept less than we know that we've earned, right? So keep in mind how gender plays a role in negotiations. The second thing is like culture. So I am African. The ways that, like, we don't negotiate. The person in charge tells you what to do and you do it. And that's it. There's no conversation. So going into corporate, even when I thought I was being treated unfairly or things were being done unfairly, like, I didn't feel like I had the voice or the right to say anything because that person was the boss. They'd work longer, they whatever. And so if there are people on your team who maybe come from, cultures that are, maybe more meek in how they present themselves, or expect that their hard work is going to be enough for you to recognize it. And we know that's not how it works in corporate or in large organizations. Like, there may be times where somebody deserves something, but they don't have they don't feel like they have the voice to ask for it, where you may be the one that needs to encourage them to step forward or more boldly into that. But you cannot for a minute underestimate the role that culture plays, your culture, right? Especially if you're someone of color and your boss is a white man. Completely different power dynamics, right? Like, and how they think about it. And so you recognizing your own status within the relationship and being aware of it as you communicate, and your intention with your language will make the conversations better and the relationship afterwards better. Another thing to think about is immigration status. And for some folks, they can use this as a way to have leverage over employees, to be like, well, we know that they need this immigration, this green card, this whatever to work here. So we're going to take advantage of them, for lack of a better thing, like, because they can't quit. And there may be people who are, hanging on and not saying anything, and are, significantly underpaid or doing more work than they should be because they know that they need the job. That's going to factor into how they show up in negotiations. And you need to be aware of that. And then the last thing is, like, seniority, like we said, power dynamics. If you've been working longer, if it's somebody who's first generation working in the professional setting, their attitudes or their expectations in the way that they approach a negotiation may not be what we deem appropriate, but they've never done it before, right? They don't understand what's expected of them. And so you have to understand, like, as someone who's more senior, who negotiates all the time because somebody's coming and asking you for a raise once a week, right? Like, you have to understand, like, how that plays into what may show up, and the types of language that may be used, and the attitudes that you may get, and the perceptions that you may get in those conversations. It's not really about you. It's about whatever they're dealing with internally that gives them the courage to have this conversation. But then you also being aware of how that may trigger something in you internally because of how you relate in any of these areas of belief, right? So your generational differences, gender, culture, immigration, and seniority. This is, again, this is before the ask. So, but this is the last part of it, right? Be very clear on what your blind spots are, which is hard, right? Because self-awareness isn't necessarily the easiest thing. But where are you? How do you pulse check in these different areas? And how do you make sure that your stuff, your beliefs, are not projected onto the person who's negotiating with you? Next out, the ask. So it's, it's Friday, you're getting ready to go and have a good holiday, and Watchen shows up in your office and it's like, hey, Dana, can we talk for a second? And you're like, oh God, like, what, girl, I'm trying to go on vacation. Like, I don't need this in my life right now. It's like, sure, right? My initial, when someone's like, can we talk for a second? And I'm pretty sure it's everybody else's, we freak out. And it's like, what do you want? Like, where is this? Like, and you, like, the worst case scenario in your mind, like, pops up and you're just like freaking out. That is not the appropriate response, because people can sense your awkwardness or your whatever with the situation. And so if they feel like you're now, like, have a defensive posture, or your energy all of a sudden changes, that then makes they're ready for war too. And so if somebody comes in, expected or unexpected, and they ask to have a conversation, or you get that dreaded calendar invite, right? That's like, can I put 30 minutes on your calendar? You're like, girl, we just met last week. What do you need to talk about now, right? Just don't freak out. If you know what the conversation is about, prepare your employee ahead of time, right? So we talked about this in phase 1. If you have not had those conversations, and I come to you on a Friday and say, hey, I want to have a conversation about a raise, and you as the boss don't feel ready, there are ways that you can get ready and not stall, but make the conversation more beneficial. And you can say, hey, I know you want to have a conversation about your about a raise or whatever. Here's some areas that I want you to prepare so that we can make sure that the conversation is beneficial. And then you give them the competencies and all those things and have them do some work around where they stack up or where they feel like they are, so that you're not doing the work necessarily in the negotiation, but they've had some reflective time to think about where they are, what they've done, how they stack up, if they've met all the requirements, if they understand certain things, and then they can come back and put some time on the calendar so that you are also prepared for the conversation. So don't feel like you have to have it right when your employee wants to have it, especially if they are not prepared for that conversation, which would not be necessarily a great use of your time. But you also don't want to create the perception that you're pushing them off or you're not prioritizing it. So make sure that, like, when you give them what they need to prepare, that you do have some time on your calendar that you can then circle back and actually have the conversation. The second thing is that you want to let go of your ego, right? So again, it's the when I was this, when I was that, I don't think you deserve this. I already think you're making too much money. And it doesn't matter if you think they're making too much money or not. Have they earned the right to make more money? Have they earned the right to have a different title, right? I don't care if it took you 10 years to become director. If someone has earned the right in 7, you shouldn't hold them back because it took you 10. So let go of, and this is hard, right? Like I always say, ego is one hell of a drug. Like our egos fuel us to do all types of things. And so you want to make sure that the conversation is not being driven by your ego, but it's actually being driven by data and what is possible and in the best interest of you, your employee, and the company, right? That gets you to that intersection of the zone of possible agreement. Ego typically does not get you there. Ego actually ends up damaging relationships, losing really high performing talent, and then having you spending a ton of money training and retraining people as they come into your org. You also want to make sure that you have empathy, right? That people are going through a lot, and y'all are people too. So you know that we're all going through a lot. And you have to understand that as people come to you and ask for things and put themselves in really vulnerable positions, right? It is hard for them. And I remember talking to an executive at a company that reorgs all the time. And this person had been there, I think she's been there like 26 years. And in the most recent reorg, one of her employees came and was like talking about her anxieties. And pretty much the response was like, oh, this happens all the time. You'll get over it, kind of thing. That is an opportunity, a missed opportunity for connection, because if you've been in 26 years, you've gone through a series of reorgs, right? Can you share a bit of your experience that helps like that person feel like you see them, you know them, and you understand them, and you are in, like you're in this together? It's the same thing. If you are in leadership, you've negotiated a bunch of times and you have not always gotten what you wanted in those situations. Are there ways to be empathetic and connect with your team so that they understand, one, it's a part of the experience of working in, large corporations, climbing up whatever ladder of success you have professionally. But you don't want it to be like, when somebody asks you for something, you say what the corporate line that was given to you, you say the PR answer, and then you move on. It's like, no, these are real humans that you are talking to who have real implications for their lives if they don't make more money, if they don't do whatever they want professionally. And so you want to make sure that there is an empathetic connection between you and that person. And then I think the most important thing that you can do when the ask happens is not to be weird, right? Like people start to fidget. We start to do all kinds of weird. It's like, why are you doing this, right? Like, because it just makes everybody more uncomfortable. And the thing is, if you are not someone who feels comfortable negotiating, it's okay to tell your employee, it's like, this is actually really uncomfortable for me. This is like, you can be human and share those things. But if you are weird, it just makes the whole situation so much more painful, right? The energy that you bring into a space makes a difference in how the conversation flows. If you're having a bad day, right? And maybe that's the day you asked for a raise and your boss told you no, you should probably reschedule the meeting with your employee, because you're going to go in there like, I'm not giving anybody anything today. Like, don't ask me for anything. Don't say anything, right? Because you just got, a response that was not in the zone of possible agreement. And so make sure that you are aware of that. If you know that you're not a strong negotiator, it's also in your best interest to practice so that you don't stonewall people, so that you're not just like, no, with no explanation, or like you come across as cold and not caring, because again, you still have to work with this person after this conversation. So you want to make sure that you're doing what you can to make sure that it is productive and healthy for the whole team. You also may want to pick a neutral place. If I feel like every time I come into your office is because you're about to tell me something negative, I'm not going to feel good about going in there. And if you know that's the case, maybe pick something that's, you know, a little less threatening, something that is more neutral, so that everybody's kind of at ease when you have the conversation. So conversation template. 3 steps to responding to an ask, right? First, you answer. Can you do it? Is it a yes? Is it a no? Is it a not right now? And then you want to give the reason. And you want to make sure that the reason is tied to skills, not person, unless the person is preventing them from accomplishing whatever competency or skill it is. So for example, if somebody is asking for a higher title and the answer is no, right? Why is it a no? Oh, because I don't think you have executive presence. Well, what does that mean, right? But if it's a no because you haven't managed projects of this level yet, right? And so you need to do that to demonstrate that you can do this at a director level, or there's a level of analytical thinking that is required in order to be put into a director position because you're less tactical at that point. And so I need to see more strategic thinking from you in this role, right? Like giving very specific work competency skills based reasons why something is a no makes it a lot easier for someone to swallow, because it also gives them something tangible to work towards. You want to make sure that you're not saying things that are like detrimental to their person, right? So like if somebody says, you know, they've been working a bunch of hours, it's like, well, yeah, join the club. We're all tired. Well, that's not helpful. Or somebody's saying like, you're lucky to have a job. Again, not helpful. And it's also not useful, right? Because then that doesn't give them anything that they can develop to become better at the thing that they're doing. Or things like, we expect loyalty. And they're like, well, great, I expect more money. And now it's like, well, nobody's winning, right? Because again, the things that you say, you have to be intentional about having them be productive. And your answer needs to be clear and direct, right? There's nothing worse than having a conversation and leaving with like, but what's next? Like, what did we talk about? What was the answer? Why didn't I? So the confusion is what kind of muddles the relationship. And then you want a plan, right? So if the answer is no, what is the plan to getting them to a yes? If the answer is yes, what happens next? Like, what can they expect from you? And if the answer is not right now, what is being done in the interim so that when the opportunity for a yes arises, that person is prepared, right? Does that make sense? All right, so let's talk a little bit about some specific examples, because I know that language is really hard for folks sometimes. So let's meet a director who wants a promotion, right? Pronouns are she, her, right? In a workplace that's evolving. And she wants a promotion, but she's not ready, right? Like she's saying that she wants to be promoted to director. She's currently like a senior manager, but she's not ready. And she comes to me and she says, hey, Watchen, I would like to be promoted to director, right? And for me, the answer is no, because she has not displayed that she is ready to be promoted to director. And so I would say, you know, hey, Ben, you know, great, glad to have this conversation with you as we think about what your next steps are professionally and in terms of development. So in order to be promoted to director within this company, here are the skills that you have to that you have had to display consistently. Here are the expectations around, you know, how you show up in the workplace, how you build relationships, how you generate revenue, whatever the case may be, like in her specific situation. And so in order for me to be able to promote you in the next cycle, here are the top 3 things that I need to see consistently from you in the next 12 months. And I will lay them out and say, like, so for example, strategic thinking. What this could look like for you is in meetings as we bring projects together, as opposed to telling me like the tactics that we can do, I expect you to bring forward to the team a bigger strategy that we could all consider as we move forward in the work, right? So you want to be very specific in that you are telling them why it's a no, what they need to show consistently, and then being in thought partnership with them in ways that they could potentially do that and show up in the workplace. So you have Lucia, and Lucia also wants a promotion to director. And the answer is yes. She's been doing fantastic work. She's ready to go. She's checked all the boxes, but the answer is yes, but it's like, you can't do it right now because you're not in the budget cycle. So in this conversation, I would say, you have been doing excellent work in these specific competencies. Unfortunately, right now, because budgets are frozen, I'm not able to give you what it is that you need. However, do not let that discourage you. Here are the things that you need to keep doing so that when the budgets are open, I can very easily advocate for you to get this money. So don't get discouraged and stop doing these specific things, because this is what proves that you're ready for director. Make sure that you keep this up, that it's highly visible, that the people who need to know about it. And then when the budgets free up, I will then, right, advocate for you to get this. My anticipation is that budgets should free up in the next quarter, but I will circle back with you if that changes. Right? So then they're very clear. They don't have to keep asking you. It's next quarter. That you as the boss have taken the onus to circle back with that person, and then they're going to trust your word because you're actually going to follow back with them. So Steph wants a 20K raise. Steph's not getting the 20K raise because, again, we have very specific ways in which people get paid and the budgets are frozen. But Steph is a rock star, right? And so what do you do in this case? Well, for me, budgets are frozen, and when it's opened back up, I'm not going to be able to give Steph 20K, right? I know I'm only going to be able to give Steph 18K or 15K or whatever. So I would have the conversation to say, hey, Steph, I know that, you've been working really hard. You've been doing all these things. You're, at a higher level than you were before. I gave you these growth areas and you have exceeded all of them. Unfortunately, we cannot give like a 20K raise, would not be approved for these specific reasons. One, the budgets are frozen, but we have a certain percentage that we give each person for a raise, right? And 20K unfortunately exceeds that raise. And so going into it, I will not be able to get this approved, but I do feel that you have earned more money. And so here's what I can advocate for that I know will get approved once the budgets are open, right? So you tell them their raise is unrealistic, because it is based on what you can actually do, and then you circle them back. Jeff wants to be manager. Jeff is not ready. He's just not. And Jeff is not going to be manager in the next 5 years because Jeff has a lot of growth that he needs to do, right? And so you have that conversation of here's what I look for managers, right? And I, as your manager, want to make sure that I'm setting you up for success, and I'm not putting you in a role where you don't get to shine as brightly as you should be based on, not being set up properly for success. And so what I want for you, because I do see your potential, is that when we put you in this role, that you actually have what you need to take it to the next level and people can see your work. And so here's what I propose. I propose that we do a development plan that then helps you build out the very specific skills that will allow you to shine when you do have the opportunity to become manager. And so in the next 12 months, here's the plan that we're going to work with. Are there any things that you think I'm forgetting? Or are there skills that you think you already have that I may be overlooking that could also help make you a better package, right? So you're not ready yet. Here's what ready looks like. And it's ultimately tied to me making sure that you are set up for success in this role. Because if I put you in a role and you're not ready, you're going to get fired. And we don't want that, because I think you're actually a rock star. Okay, so when you're having these conversations, one, you want to be specific, you want to be transparent, and you want to show them a path to a win. Those are the three things that are the most important. You don't want to make it personal. You don't want to guarantee results unless you know that those results are going to be exactly what you say. And then you want to not compare it to how it was back in the day, like I did with Alex in my head, but I didn't say it out loud. Okay, so then after they ask and that you've had this conversation, you want to make sure that you are charting a successful path forward, right? So you want to empower the employees. So you give them a roadmap, but then you tell them the things that they can do, and then they go out and they do it. You want to commit to their development, even if it's not with you. There are some people who are hired for jobs that they should no longer be doing, right? That their skill sets don't necessarily align. And so you want to commit to help them develop, even if it means moving them out to somewhere else. Because for me, a win is keeping people in the company, right? Like if you have high performing talent, even if they don't work with your department, it's a win for the company to keep them. And then you want to, help your employees, because ultimately it helps you become a better manager that people want to work for, right? Like those things are really important. So back to Alex. When I left the Sky, I knew that I was leaving 2 years before I left. And so I started to groom Alex. And in the beginning of our conversation, I told him, Alex, I can't give you what you want right now, but I do see you as a leader. And here are the things that I'm willing to commit to in order to help you prepare so that when I leave, you can take over my job, right? And so we worked out a plan of here's the process, here are the skill gaps that you currently have. that I can, help you develop. We will spend money on conferences and classes and courses while we'll make sure that you get higher profile assignments so that people can see you and start to think about you in this way. And then I talked to our CEO about like, how do we make sure that we don't lose Alex? How do we make sure that Alex knows that he's valued here, even though we can't pay him a competitive salary, like if he had gone to the Bulls or any of the other larger teams? And when I left 2 years later, Alex now has my job. And Alex is doing such a phenomenal job. I think they'll probably be the sponsorship team of the year in the league this year. But it's because like when he asked me, even though I was like taken aback, I was a little annoyed. I realized that Alex was actually a rock star. And we put together a plan that then helped him to now be able to take over and run. He's been running my department for almost like a year now, a year and a half, and he's been doing a fantastic job. But it's because we're in thought partnership, so that even though he got a no in the beginning, he did get other things like, higher profile and more visibility. But then when the opportunity came and presented himself, he was able to take over my role. So key takeaways: get clear on the process, ensure that there's clarity around metrics and competencies, provide ongoing feedback, and then be on the same team as your employees. In terms of preparing for a winning conversation, you want to focus on a true win. Again, that's the intersection of a win for you and a win for your employee. You want to dig deeper past the surface level ask, because sometimes you may not be able to grant the surface level ask, but the ask under the ask may be something that's possible. Be clear on what you can actually deliver. Like, don't make false promises. That's the quickest way to ruin trust in your organization. And then you want to also make sure that you are checking your beliefs about what negotiations should be, or how they should be, or what should be worth negotiating. During the conversation, you want to let go of your ego, have some empathy, don't be weird, be a human. Give them some specific and transparent reasons for whatever you gave them. So if it's a yes, they still need to know why you said yes, right? Don't make it personal, and don't take it personal. They may not give you the response that you want, right? Even though you are doing everything that you can to give them what you can give them, it's not personal, it's their own stuff. And don't take it personal, and don't make it about you, because it's not. It's more about what they need. And then make a plan and set expectations about what you can influence and who you can influence. And then after the conversation, you want to work as a leader to empower your employees. Is there development budget? Is there, stuff that you can do to make them feel like and know that they're important, that they matter? You want to help them develop, even if it means them working somewhere else, right? Because retention of good talent is just good business in general. And then you want to remember not to not forget to support them when they get a yes, because what you don't want is for people to come back and stop doing the behaviors that ended up making them look like a rock star in the first place. And that's that. I know that was a ton of information, so happy to answer any questions that you guys may have as we wrap this up.